You probably see this on YouTube where somebody will say, okay, well, 32-bit float, you can bring down the, you know, you can rescue the clip from clipping, but this is incorrect. The person doing this won't name him. He just doesn't understand the data. He's not doing what he's thinking he's doing. I'm going to sort of explain the fundamentals of data, hopefully, in this video. What is my voltage? What voltage am I? Okay, now that we have our audio file, I've written a script in Python that will take the audio file and it will basically pull out the numbers. You know, what are the numbers that that Audacity recorded from my Motu, from the microphone? What voltages did it record? So I'm going to run this script. And you can see it does, you know, the values, whatever. So it's maximum value 32768, which is what we'd expect because the range of 16-bit, the 16-bit audio file is from negative 32,000 essentially to positive 32,000. So now we're going to open the Excel file. And let me get this fit here. And these are the index. So basically 48,000 of these would make a second. So if we count down to here, if I take this equals this divided by 48, 1, 2, 3, it's going to say it's 2.6 seconds. And in fact, let's go listen to that or play that. What voltage am I? And you can see, yeah, it was 2.6 seconds. Okay, so let's graph all our values. So we're going to take the integer values. So I need to convince you that this is the data from the file, just in case you don't believe me. But I think you do. I'll just do a line chart, and there we are. See, it looks just like it looked in Audacity. Okay, so now let's go back up to the top again. All right, so the file starts with an integer value of 0, which is negative 96 dB. Now, that's because in 16-bit, it has 96 dB of range. And this is something that confused me for a long time. And I'm still not clear. Some YouTubers out there totally understand this. And I want to explain it to you because I think it's one of the most important things for anybody who works with audio to understand. And it's so important, I'm gonna give you my whole face to talk about. Let's pretend there's some kind of apocalypse. It's the year 3000, and we discover this with this, right? And we read some books, and we know that somehow we can record something in this microphone into here. Now, again, if you don't understand this stuff, this is going to be very fascinating, but you have to bear with me. It takes a while to explain, and you really need to think through everything I'm going to tell you. So you take your microphone, and you find a voltmeter or whatever, and you determine that you want to record, and you know that if you're not speaking into it, there's no voltage. But if you speak into it, let's just say for the sake of argument, the first increment you notice from nothing to something is 100 microvolts. So you say, okay, I want to record, we're going to record these voltages from 100 microvolt steps, right? 100 microvolts, 200 microvolts, 300 microvolts, right? Makes perfect sense what I do, right? And by the way, in a sense, this is dumb, but you'll get it that we actually make some choices that aren't optimal, but that we don't hear the difference. Anyway, so we're gonna measure our voltages in 100 microvolt steps, and that's what we do. Well, we're gonna do that, and then we're working on the microphone, and then we go to the guy that has found the recorder, and we're saying, okay, we want to measure 100 microvolt steps and then record that. And the guy that working on the recorder is going to say, well, wait, 100 microvolts is too little. You can't record anything on the tape. The electronics is just too faint a signal. So we need to amplify it. But fortunately, in this thing, there's this amplifier. So when we plug this in, it'll take the 100 microvolts and it'll make it a volt or whatever, right? Let's just say a volt. So it'd be 100 volts, 100 volts plus 100 microvolts or whatever, 101 volts, whatever. It's basically going to take the numbers and just going to make them larger. But they're still the same numbers. They're just moved up the scale. So we say, fine, okay. So we're going to record in that, in that way. And then somebody else comes with a microphone, and they say, okay, well, this really works in 10 microvolt things. So how are we going to work with that? And then the person says, well, it just so happens that this will also amplify that. But let's just say, for sake of argument, that it won't, right? So then they're going to say, well, we need a different amplifier, that only certain microphones will work with this because you need a certain amount of amplification to get into the tape. But they'll probably find that most microphones will work with it. But what they'll find is that some microphones will work much better with this than other microphones. So early in the history of audio, many microphones had their own preamps. So they basically had their own preamps. They brought it up to a level that was optimized for the voltage of the microphone, and then they'd plug that into whatever equipment that they had. But then over time, people said, oh, forget it, we're going to make it so it'll sort of work with every mic, even though it's not optimized for the particular voltages that each mic is putting out. You're not really going to hear the difference. But that's not actually the main part of the story, what's really interesting about what goes on. Because the engineers basically said that what's really important to measure our audio with, because again, I'm sorry I keep saying that word again, you're recording the voltages. When they're showing it on the meters, let's talk about the meters, though this one doesn't have a meter. They say, well, what are we going to show the meters at? Are we going to show it at, in microvolts, in millivolts? Because each microphone does different things. So if it's 100 microvolt steps, we're going to show that. We show 10 microvolt steps. We're going to show millivolt steps. What steps are we going to show in our meters? And then the people who engineered the recorders and the amplifiers basically said, listen, what's important, everything really comes from the saturation point on down. So when you record something in the audio tape, there's a certain voltage that we're going to send to this tape that if we send more of that voltage, it's not going to magnetize the particles anymore. That it's run out of particles. It's saturated the amount of volume of sound that we can record. So really, this is going to be true for every tape recorder we have. Every pressing of vinyl records, string recording, wire recording, all our recording devices will all have a maximum saturation point. So let's call that 0 dB. And because we hear things exponentially in a sense, we're going to create a new scale. We call it decibels or bells or whatever, and we're going to think in that scale. So every recorder will have a maximum voltage loudness that it can record, and then we're going to show from the bottom up to that in dBs. And so that's what happened. And it's such an important thing to understand. But remember, the microphone is sending out, when it gets into the amplifier, it's getting numbers that are always the same, or that represent real voltages coming from the microphone. The problem with a lot of people a lot of these YouTubers who show these waveforms is they're disconnected from that reality. Because they're not from the year 3000 trying to figure this stuff out. But again, it's been handed down to them. And because it's been handed down over the years and the years, people forget about the basics. Now, people who are really into audio engineering understand all this stuff. Like if you design the equipment, you understand it. But many people using it do not use it. To many people, this is an alien technology today. And even their digital stuff is alien. And they've long lost connection to how it actually works, that there are real voltages coming out of these microphones, and they differ in their intensity. And because they differ in their intensity, they differ in the amount they have to be amplified, and they want to be amplified to the point where it's going to record the best, because the person, again, who makes the record is going to say, listen, we don't want a voltage above the saturation point, but all the voltages from the saturation point down, all the voltages closer to the saturation point will be the most accurate. As you get voltages there that are lower and lower, this isn't as accurate in recording them. And you get to a point where if they're really small voltages, again, they're coming from the preamp or amp from the microphone now, you get to these small voltages, it's just like noise from the amplifier itself, because heat just creates noise within it. Or the microphone is picking up just air molecules or whatever. You're just getting this noise. So the more you get close to that saturation point, the more accurate your audio is. So that's what you want to do. But on the other hand, you don't want to get so close to the saturation point that if you get audio above it, loudness above it, that you don't get it anymore, which is clipping. Again, clipping has been around forever and will never, ever, ever leave. Because you're always going to balance trying to get your audio closer to the saturation point where it's the most accurate with to get rid of your noise, to not getting to so point where it's going to clip. It's always going to be a balance. And that's why I get enraged when Rhodes says, oh, 32-bit float means you don't need the gain knob. That is so against physics. Everything we know, Newton, Leibniz, whatever, Helmholtz especially, all these great pioneers, you're basically flipping the bird to them when you say that. It is so, so, so wrong. All right, back to the other stuff. All right, so here's our data from the microphone. And again, I wanted to show you that I recorded a clip in 16-bit. I have a Python script that wrote out the numbers. These are the numbers. There are no other numbers in audio. That's nothing. Like people think, oh, there's waveforms and there's sines and there's this and there's noise floors. No. As far as the microphone's good, the only data you have to work with is that data captured at every sample. That's it, that one number. All there is that one number. Now I put in dBs just to illustrate some points here. But this is very difficult for me to wrap my head around, even today. It's hard for me to think about numbers as 0 starts at negative 96. If this was 24-bit, it would start at negative 144. Right? Why do we have these negative numbers? Because actually, if you go and you read about, the strength of sound, the loudness of sound, it's positive. So if you say, well, at what decibels at a rock concert would you, so for instance, OSHA says that rock concerts really can't go over 110 dB. It's a positive number. They're measuring the sounds as a positive number, saying this positive, which is intuitive to us. Like the loudness is a rising number. At what number do we get hearing damage? So they say no concerts above 110 dB. And of course, that's also relative to how close you are to the speakers. But again, for the people closest to the speakers, can't be over 110 dB. And this also begs the question, if you think about it, like right there, like you say, 32-bit float is necessary. I mean, why? I mean, it's just, it's just, if you could get a sound above, well, first of all, you got a sound at 120 dB, you're getting hearing loss, right? So 24-bit can already, if you did play a sound at true range of 24-bit and you played it, sounds above 120 dB, you'd be killing people's hearing. So why do you even need to record such a sound, right? Now, you can say the argument the other way. Well, you don't understand, like the higher bit depth is so you can get stuff, the noise, right, to get the quiet parts. But the problem is the more detail you try and get in the quiet parts, the more you just get noise. You don't get anything meaningful. And theoretically, you can argue, oh yeah, if we had a 128-bit float, we could get this super resolution, very quiet sounds. But why? I mean, you couldn't hear the difference. You couldn't hear the difference between noise. I mean, again, I'm not going to go. Sorry for going down that rabbit hole. The main thing I want to focus on here is the data. And that is, in 16-bit, we have, we'll find out. So let's just find out what the maximum value is of these numbers. But I think we already saw it on on the program. Okay, so it's in the Python program. So it's basically, so yeah, 32,760. That's the loudest voltage. That's the greatest voltage from the microphone, which matches the greatest uh, uh, loudest sound. So 32,767. So we can find that. Okay, so here are those numbers, and yet they're 0 dB, right? How is the loudest sound a 0 dB, right? Again, this is all counterintuitive, but it's very important to understand this. Again, the thing I want to really hit home is to show you, I recorded with a wave file. I mean, recorded with a microphone. You saw me do it using Audacity. I brought it into Python. I created these numbers. Now I have another script somewhere that'll take the numbers and recreate the wave file. I just have to do that myself to make sure, well, I'm not imagining anything. And I should do that here, but I'm too lazy to go find the script. But believe me, you can take these numbers and create the wave file exactly as recorded. So just want to show you these numbers to show you that, again, it's you're talking from, you're going down from 100, and the maximum, the largest number in your bit depth is your highest voltage, and the lowest number is no voltage, and that's measured as a negative number. And this is the other thing that's confusing about it. Well, I'm going to show you. We're going to use was it Wavelab or whatever from Steinberg or something like that. Anyway, let's go to that to explain the next part. Okay, so I'm going to show you stuff that it's mind-blowing, right? And you're not going to believe me. Because again, I'm not an audio engineer. I didn't go to school for any of this, but I'm going to argue that Steinberg, those experts, the total experts, have done something that is wrong, that I don't think they should have done. I understand why they did it. I'm going to explain why they did it and why I guess maybe I would do it in their place, but in my opinion, it's wrong. And it's wrong in a way that, again, would mislead somebody. You saw when I pulled the data from that WAV file I recorded in 16-bit, all the values are between negative 32,000 and positive 32,000, because 16-bit has 16,000 integers of resolution. All right, so here's the WAV file and it's open. Now we're in dBs. Now, you might say, well, why does it go from like maximum dB to negative 6 dB? I mean, it doesn't make sense that the sound, that this is the loudest, well, sorry, this is the loudest right here, right? But you can actually move in and on the scale. And actually, 16-bit, as I said, has 96 dB of range. So when we get to 90, we get past it to 100. Why is it scaling past 100? I mean, the 16-bit won't have anything past 100. So what's it really doing here? I mean, this is incorrect. So again, you know, it's not incorrect in the sense like anybody working with audio, like it's gonna make them do something wrong. Like no one would ever do this. But I'm just showing that they're not really, when they're thinking about this stuff, they're thinking about practical applications of how you're thinking about the data. So they're basically saying, if we're gonna zoom in on the data, we'll zoom in how many dBs you want, even if the file doesn't support. So to me, this is actually a bug. Well, I mean, they might say, well, we're now splitting those dBs at the high range up. So again, you can sort of argue it, but anyway, I just want to show you this. But this isn't where I would argue that what they've done is incorrect. But I just want to show, this would be the default view of looking at your data in dBs. And hopefully in my software editing, I can explode this because it's hard to read these numbers right here. They're very small, and I can't make them higher. Okay, if I right-click on the scale, I can pick a 16-bit range. Again, these are the nominal values, and this is correct. This is what we're seeing in the file. If you look here, you can see that this will max out at about, well, let's just bring that down a teeny bit. Right, okay. So this is brought down all the way. And you'll see that the max value here is 32,767, and the least value is negative 32,000. This is correct, right? This is scaling the data, excuse me, as it appears in this file. This is correct, okay. So now let's go look at 24-bit range. Now, this is where they're, I'll send them an email, see what they say. How do you take a number, right? Remember, this number, let's just look at this again. So let's take around this peak right here. It's around 8,000, right? That's the number in our file. There's 8,000 of voltage, of a number. We're counting, remember, from 0 on up. So we count from 0 on up, coming down from the maximum voltage as I explained, and we're getting 8,000. So we go to 24-bit, that number now is 20 million. Was it 20 million or is it 8,000? Now what they'll argue is the reason they're scaling this way is that because, again, everything is measured down from that maximum voltage. So saying that whatever the maximum value is that you have for your voltage, we're going to scale down all the numbers. But this is incorrect because these are not the numbers. I mean, this is a range, but these aren't the numbers in that range. So if you had it correctly here, what you'd be looking at is, let's go back to dB, well, you can't even shrink it further. So they're not even allowing you to shrink it to a certain, to that point. So I get what they're doing here. They're basically saying within a 24-bit range, these are the numbers. But the reason it's wrong is because this now basically implies that you can get more resolution in these 20 million than you could have gotten in these 8,000. And that's incorrect, right? I mean, think about it. Whether I save this file or record it in 16-bit or 24-bit, depth does not change the resolution of any sort of specific data points that you're looking at. They are what they are. They're measured 1, 2, 3. The 1, 2, 3 is the same for 16-bit, 24-bit, any bit. It's the same number. Now the only difference is that in 24-bit, obviously, you have more numbers to work with, but you're still starting with the same maximum number and you're working your way down, and it's still going in the same increments. Right? You know what I'm saying? There's not more resolution there. You'd have to prove, if there was, right, then you would say, okay, well, when you recorded your, what voltage am I at, you need to record at 24-bit to get the maximum resolution. But when I did that, like, you're not like, oh, well, that was a dumb thing because he's not going to get the maximum resolution of his recording because he didn't record in 24-bit, because that's not how it works, right? The voltage is, the bit depth makes a certain amount of sense early on, like how many numbers but after a certain point, it does not make a difference. Like each range of whatever you're talking with is only going to have a certain range of numbers, and they're never going to change, whether it's 16-bit, 18-bit, 24-bit, it doesn't make a difference. So in this is telling you that, oh, when I'm looking at here, there's more data here. There isn't more data here. It's scaled, so skipping tons of numbers. So you're taking 8,000, you're basically filling them up with fake numbers. You're implying that these fake numbers that these numbers are here and they represent something. They do not represent something. Each jump in that data is nothing. It doesn't mean anything. So in my opinion, I would have graphed this as, when I showed 24-bit, that they do only go to 8 million. Now what that means is that the graph would completely collapse. You would see nothing. And so, well, why would that be useful? So I'm sure some engineers say, well, they probably had a conversation about, like, well, if we do that, if we show our numbers, nominal numbers, the same in any bit depth, then, if we show 16-bit and 24-bit, it'll get a flat line. They would just basically have to zoom and zoom and zoom into that 24-bit to get to the data. Like, who would do that? It doesn't make any sense, right? In a practical point of view. So they didn't do it. So they said, listen, we're always going to scale each bit depth to the maximum voltage, and and work our way down perceptually by dBs, in a sense, by laws, by scaled by decibels. So, but again, I think you need to understand this, because if you do understand this, then you're like, well, wait, if somebody's saying that 32-bit float, if it can, if I don't need the gain knob anymore, if it reduces clipping, well, I mean, how does it do it exactly? Because if I'm clapping here, right, and it's not really picking up, or I speak very loud and I start clipping in 16-bit, and I see that once my maximum voltage is below that clipping range, that I have perfect resolution, then how does adding more change that? And because again, when you look at this, you're saying that, okay, in 24-bit I have more resolution. No, you don't have more resolution. Okay, it's the same resolution you had before. Again, I showed you the numbers. They go from 32,000 to what, a negative 32 to 32,000. There's studies. No study has been able to put somebody in front of speakers and play them 24-bit audio, and they can tell it's 32-bit. I'm sorry, 24-bit versus 16-bit. You just can't do it. And these are just the hard facts of life, of audio engineering. And when you start teaching people that this is something that can be overcome, you can't. And you're not understanding it, like how it works. And it is complicated. And again, it hurts my brain to look at this stuff all the time. Like when I first opened this up and I had it on dB, I'm like, why is it going this down to negative 12 dB? Like, shouldn't it be like 96 dB? Like, shouldn't it be like this automatically? Like, right? I mean, this is how I would expect it to be. Now, why isn't it like this? Because they decided, again, in a practical sense, that if you're looking at anything in a waveform and you're looking at it from the highest, the lowest level, there's no data there. Like once you're above the noise floor, right? There's no point in looking at this data way down here. There's no point at looking at anything that's like negative, 100 dB. Now, when they mean 100 dB here, they mean not negative in the way I showed you before, where you're talking about negative from the voltage. They're talking about negative as perception, right? Like think about it. Like let's make this scale, larger, right? These are the peaks. Why are the peaks at 0? Shouldn't the peaks be at negative 96 dB for 16-bit or negative 144 dB for 24-bit? Why are they 0 here, right? And this is what's so confusing about audio. Like when you look at your dB scales, you have to know what they're referencing. And that's another bugbear of mine when they're talking about, 32-bit float does above 0 dB full scale. 0 dB full scale is the definition of the maximum voltage from your audio. You cannot go above it because the equipment can't work above. The equipment uses that to measure everything. It's the same as this is Spinal Tap, where he draws 11 on the knob. You can say that your knob goes to 11. You can say you go above 0 dB FS, but you're butchering the concept. 0 dB FS is always the maximum voltage from the... And again, I'm not an audio engineer, so write in the comments if you think this is untrue. Now again, you can scale it to show above 0 dB FS, but I don't get what you get out of it any more than writing 11 on your knob. So, but it's in all the software. Like I said, there's no reason you should be able to scale this to negative 130 dB. There's no information there. It's 16-bit. It's 96 dB. It should stop at 96 dB. There's no information. The same thing, like when you show the nominal values, they should be the nominal values in 16-bit as in 24-bit. But again, they've scaled it because it doesn't, in a practical sense, it just doesn't make any sense to show it. Anyway, I've rambled long enough. I hope you find this interesting. I do. I always find this ceaselessly interesting. It's so complicated. So I'm just going to say one last thing. So let me just go back to full face, I guess. So when we record voltages, they are integers. So in 32-bit float, well, actually, the computers all save it as 32-bit float. It works in 32-bit float. It essentially works in fractions. And I would argue, well, wait, there's no such thing as like half of an electron, because essentially you're counting electrons. There's no such thing as like half an electron volt or a third of an electron volt. It's one, it's one or the other, right? Either the electron is there pushing or it's not. But you can make the argument that no, quantum mechanics, we don't think about electrons as being like these particles with very specific, it's, plus volt, it's a probability sphere, right? So you have a probability cloud around your atom, and the electron might be there, might not. So it's totally okay to talk about the electron, to measure it in 32-bit float on the computer, to say that you have a 0.5 volt, right? Because maybe the electron is there and maybe it's not. We don't know for sure. We can call it 0.5 because we don't really know. So the audio stuff, it's so deep. So deep. It brings you into the world of physics, theoretical physics, the universe, entropy, non-entropy, how everything works. Okay. It's so cool. And I hope, I've inspired you to really think about this stuff, because there are no answers. I mean, like I showed with the Steinberg, with WaveLab Pro, right? They made a decision about something that you can go either way. You can make an argument, no, scale everything in the space of your data, 24-bit, 16-bit. That's their argument. That's what they did. And my argument is no, the value is the value, whatever space you're in. A 1 is a 1 and a 3 is a 3. If it's a 3, it's a 3. It's not like a 150 in 24-bit. You can argue that from 2 to 3, which is 150 and 24. That's true, but still, is it? But really, is it a 150? I recorded a 3. So again, stuff is super fascinating, and I hope you get something out of this video.